When I bought my first caravan, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd watched YouTube videos, joined caravanning Facebook groups, read countless articles, and spent hours researching online. I genuinely believed I was prepared, but the reality was very different. Like most first-time caravanners, I made plenty of mistakes. Some were small and funny, some were frustrating, and a few could have been avoided completely if somebody had simply told me beforehand. The good news is that every mistake taught me something valuable. And today I want to share those lessons with you so hopefully you can avoid some of the same headaches I experienced. Because if you're new to caravanning, chances are you're going to make mistakes too. That's completely normal. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is learning faster and enjoying the journey. Now, my very first mistake happened before I even left home. I packed way too much stuff, and I mean way too much. I treated the caravan like I was moving house rather than going on a holiday. I packed tools I never used, spare parts I didn't need, kitchen gadgets that stayed in cupboards, extra clothes that never came out of bags. I convinced myself I needed everything. You know the thinking. What if I need this? What if I need that? Before long, the caravan was loaded with items that added weight but provided almost no value. And here's what I learned. Most people massively overpack when they start caravanning. The reality is you'll use the same small group of items over and over again. Everything else simply takes up space and adds unnecessary weight. These days, I travel much lighter, and honestly, caravanning is easier because of it. The next mistake I made was buying too many gadgets. This is something I see new caravanners doing all the time. You start watching videos and suddenly you think you need every accessory ever invented. Solar gadgets, camping gadgets, storage gadgets, kitchen gadgets. The list never ends. I spent money on things I thought I would use constantly. Many of them ended up sitting in cupboards collecting dust. The truth is, you don't need the perfect setup to enjoy caravanning. Some of the happiest travelers I've met have very simple setups. They focus on experiences, not equipment, and that's a lesson I wish I learned much earlier. Another mistake I made was not properly understanding caravan weights. Now this is a big one. When you're new, terms like ATM, GTM, payload, and towball weight can sound confusing. And because they're confusing, many people simply ignore them. That's exactly what I did. I assumed if the dealer said my vehicle could tow the van, everything would be fine. But towing safely is about much more than just maximum towing capacity. It's about understanding the entire setup. Looking back, I should have spent more time learning how caravan weights actually work. Not because it's exciting, let's be honest, weight discussions aren't exactly thrilling, but because understanding weights gives you confidence and helps keep your setup safe. Now, another mistake I made was rushing my first trip. I was so excited to finally get out on the road that I planned too much driving. I thought bigger kilometers meant bigger adventures. What actually happened was I arrived tired, stressed, and exhausted. Instead of enjoying the journey, I was focused on reaching the destination. And that's completely backwards. One of the best things caravanning teaches you is to slow down. You don't need to drive huge distances every day. In fact, shorter travel days are often much more enjoyable. You have more energy, more time to explore, and far less stress. These days, I would much rather drive a few relaxed hours and enjoy the afternoon than spend all day behind the wheel. Now let's talk about setting up at camp, because this is where another big mistake happened. On my first trip, I had absolutely no setup routine. I arrived at camp and started doing everything randomly. I was connecting power before leveling, looking for hoses, searching for wheel chocks, trying to find tools. It felt chaotic, and because it felt chaotic, it also felt stressful. What I learned very quickly is that simple routines make caravanning easier. Experienced caravanners often follow the same setup process every single time: park, level, chock wheels, connect services, simple, predictable, efficient. Once I developed a routine, setup became much faster and much less stressful. Another mistake I made was underestimating how important storage organization is. At first, I just put things wherever they fit, and that worked for about one day. After that, I couldn't find anything. Every time I needed a cable, tool, torch, hose fitting, or kitchen item, I had to search multiple cupboards. It became frustrating very quickly. Eventually, I realized organization isn't about being neat. It's about saving time and reducing stress. When everything has a home, caravanning becomes easier. You know where things are, you spend less time searching, and more time enjoying yourself. Now, here's another mistake I think many beginners will relate to. I worried far too much about what other caravanners thought. I would arrive at caravan parks and see people with expensive setups, fancy tow vehicles, huge solar systems, and every accessory imaginable, and I'd start comparing myself. Maybe you've done the same thing. You start thinking your setup isn't good enough. You think you need more equipment, more upgrades, more gadgets. But here's what I eventually realized: nobody cares. Most caravanners are focused on enjoying their own trip, and some of the most experienced travelers I met had surprisingly simple setups. They weren't chasing perfection. They were chasing freedom. That's a lesson that completely changed the way I approach caravanning today. Your setup doesn't need to impress anyone. It only needs to work for you. And honestly, once you stop comparing yourself to others, caravanning becomes far more enjoyable. Because instead of focusing on what you don't have, you start appreciating everything you already do have. And that mindset shift makes a huge difference. Another mistake I made during my first caravan setup was not practicing enough before my first trip. I was excited, really excited. The day I picked up the caravan, all I wanted to do was hit the road. So that's exactly what I did. The problem was I hadn't spent enough time learning how everything worked. I hadn't practiced connecting the van multiple times. I hadn't practiced reversing properly. I hadn't familiarized myself with all the switches, water systems, electrical systems, and appliances. So when little issues came up on the road, they felt like big problems, not because they were difficult, but because they were unfamiliar. Looking back, I should have spent a weekend at home simply learning my caravan, testing everything, connecting and disconnecting the van, running the water system, testing the power, learning where everything was located. That simple preparation would have saved a lot of unnecessary stress. Another mistake I made was trying to learn everything at once. Caravanning can feel overwhelming when you're new. Suddenly you're learning about solar systems, battery management, water tanks, grey water, gas systems, weight distribution, tire pressures, towing techniques, free camping, caravan parks, and about 100 other things. I remember feeling like I needed to become an expert immediately. The reality is, you don't. One of the best lessons I learned is that caravanning is a journey. You learn a little more on every trip. Nobody knows everything when they start. And honestly, nobody knows everything years later either. The important thing is continuous learning, not instant perfection. Now let's talk about one of my more expensive mistakes: buying upgrades before I actually knew what I needed. This happens all the time. New caravanners often start buying modifications before they've done enough traveling to understand their real needs. I definitely did. I bought things because other people recommended them. I bought things because YouTube videos suggested them. I bought things because they looked impressive. But after spending time on the road, I realized some of those upgrades weren't solving problems I actually had. That's why today I always recommend spending time using your caravan first. Travel with it, experience it, understand how you camp, then make upgrades based on your actual needs, not somebody else's. Because every caravanner travels differently. What works perfectly for one person may be completely unnecessary for another. Another mistake I made was carrying too much water all the time. Now, don't get me wrong, water is important, very important. But as a beginner, I often traveled with completely full water tanks even when I didn't need to, and that's a lot of extra weight. Sometimes I was heading to caravan parks with full facilities and water available on site, yet I was still hauling hundreds of liters of water around for no reason. Over time, I learned to think more strategically. If I'm heading somewhere remote, absolutely, I'll carry plenty of water. But if I'm traveling between caravan parks with easy access to facilities, I don't always need every tank completely full. Small adjustments like this can make towing easier and reduce unnecessary weight. Now, another mistake I made was not checking tire pressures often enough. This is one of those boring topics that becomes very important very quickly. When you're new, tire pressures aren't exactly exciting, but they have a huge impact on towing stability, fuel consumption, tire wear, and safety. There were times early on when I simply assumed everything was fine. I didn't check as regularly as I should have. Today, tire checks are part of my routine, before trips, during trips, and whenever conditions change significantly. It's a simple habit that provides peace of mind, and peace of mind is incredibly valuable when you're traveling. Now let's talk about camp setup equipment. One mistake I made was not having everything easily accessible. I'd arrive at camp and realize the item I needed first was buried under 10 other things. The wheel chocks would be at the back, the leveling ramps would be hidden somewhere else, the power lead would be packed underneath half the storage compartment. Every setup became harder than it needed to be. Eventually, I learned something very simple. The items you use first should be the easiest to access. The items you use regularly should have dedicated locations, and the items you rarely use can go deeper into storage. That small change alone made setting up camp much faster. Another mistake I made was overthinking every decision. I think a lot of new caravanners can relate to this. I worried about choosing the perfect campsite, the perfect route, the perfect caravan park, the perfect setup, the perfect equipment, the perfect everything. And honestly, it was exhausting. What I eventually learned is that caravanning doesn't require perfection. Sometimes you'll choose a campsite that's just okay. Sometimes you'll make a wrong turn. Sometimes you'll forget something. Sometimes plans change. And that's perfectly normal. In fact, many of the best travel memories come from unexpected situations. The more flexible I became, the more enjoyable caravanning became. Now, here's another mistake that surprised me. I didn't fully appreciate how much maintenance a caravan requires. Not because caravans are unreliable, but because they're constantly moving. They're exposed to vibration, weather, road conditions, dust, heat, rain. Things naturally require attention. Seals need checking, tires need inspecting, wheel bearings need maintenance, connections need monitoring. Early on, I thought maintenance was something I'd deal with occasionally. Now I understand that regular maintenance is simply part of responsible caravan ownership, and the good news is that small regular checks usually prevent much bigger problems later. That's a lesson I wish I understood from the beginning, because preventative maintenance is almost always easier, cheaper, and less stressful than emergency repairs. And learning that changed the way I look after my caravan completely. One mistake I definitely made during my first year of caravanning was assuming every problem needed an immediate solution. Something would go wrong and I'd instantly think I needed to buy a product to fix it. A cupboard rattled. I looked for a gadget. Storage felt messy. I looked for a gadget. Something wasn't quite perfect. I looked for another gadget. Before long, I was spending more time researching accessories than actually enjoying the trip. What I eventually realized was that many caravan problems solve themselves naturally through experience. You learn better packing methods, you develop better routines, you adjust your setup over time. Not every inconvenience requires a purchase. Sometimes it simply requires experience, and that's a lesson I wish I learned much sooner. Another mistake I made was not allowing enough time for setup and pack up days. In the beginning, I treated travel days like a race. Wake up early, pack quickly, get on the road immediately. The result? I forgot things, rushed things, and created unnecessary stress. Over time, I learned that slower mornings make for better travel days. Now I take my time. I double check connections. I walk around the van. I confirm everything is secure. And then I leave. The entire day feels more relaxed because of it. One mistake that many beginners make, including me, is underestimating the importance of a final walk around. This simple habit can save a lot of problems. Before moving the caravan, I now walk completely around the setup. I check stabilizer legs, I check steps, I check hatches, I check windows, I check storage compartments, I check safety chains, I check the coupling. It only takes a minute or two, but those couple of minutes can prevent a very expensive mistake. And trust me, it's far better to find a problem while parked than after you've driven down the highway. Now let's talk about power management, because this was another area where I made mistakes. When I first started caravanning, I didn't fully understand how much power different appliances used. I assumed batteries would last forever. I assumed solar would magically keep everything charged. And I didn't pay enough attention to consumption. Then reality arrived. There were times when batteries ran lower than expected, times when cloudy weather affected solar charging, times when I realized I should have understood my electrical system better. Thankfully, modern systems are much easier to manage than they used to be, but understanding your setup still matters. The more you understand your power system, the more confident you become when free camping or traveling off-grid. Another mistake I made was buying equipment based on fear. This is something I see all the time in caravanning groups. People buy things because they're worried something might happen, not because they actually need them. I did exactly the same thing. I carried backup items for my backup items. Spare equipment I never used. Extra gear just in case. The funny thing is, most of it never left the storage compartment. Over time, I learned that preparation is important, but excessive preparation can become unnecessary clutter. Finding the balance is what matters. Now, here's a mistake that I think many new caravanners experience. I focused too much on the caravan and not enough on the travel. I became obsessed with improving the setup, changing the setup, upgrading the setup, researching the setup, talking about the setup. Meanwhile, I was forgetting why I bought the caravan in the first place: to travel, to explore, to see Australia, to create memories. At some point, I realized that the caravan is simply the tool. The destination isn't the caravan, the destination is the lifestyle. And that mindset shift completely changed how I approached caravanning. Now let's talk about weather. One mistake I made early on was not paying enough attention to forecasts. I'd check the weather briefly and assume everything would be fine. Then I'd arrive somewhere and discover strong winds, heavy rain, extreme heat, or conditions that made setting up more difficult. These days I pay much closer attention. Weather affects towing, weather affects camping, weather affects comfort. A few minutes checking forecasts can help you make much better decisions. And better decisions lead to less stress. Now, another mistake I made was expecting every trip to be perfect. This one took me a while to learn. I had this picture in my head of what caravanning should look like. Beautiful campsites, perfect sunsets, no problems, no challenges, no setbacks. But real caravanning isn't like that. Sometimes it rains for days. Sometimes campsites disappoint you. Sometimes things break. Sometimes plans change. And that's okay, because the reality is that imperfections are part of the adventure. The sooner I accepted that, the more enjoyable every trip became. One of my biggest setup mistakes was not having a simple checklist. This sounds incredibly basic, but checklists work. Pilots use them, truck drivers use them, boaties use them, and caravanners should use them too. There are a lot of things to remember when setting up and packing up. Power leads, water hoses, windows, steps, awnings, locks, storage compartments. It's very easy to forget something. A simple checklist removes that pressure from your brain. Instead of relying on memory, you rely on a system, and systems are usually much more reliable than memory. Today, I still use checklists, not because I don't know what I'm doing, but because they help prevent simple mistakes. And honestly, some of the smartest caravanners I know do exactly the same thing, because experience teaches you something important. Simple systems often produce the best results, and caravanning becomes much more enjoyable when you're not constantly worrying about forgetting something. As I look back on my first caravan setup and those early trips, one thing becomes very clear. Most of my mistakes didn't happen because I was careless. They happened because I was new. And that's something every beginner needs to remember. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to forget things. You're going to learn lessons the hard way sometimes. That's not failure. That's experience. Every experienced caravanner you meet today was once a beginner too. They've forgotten hoses. They've packed too much gear. They've struggled reversing. They've made wrong turns. They've arrived at campsites and realized they forgot something important. It's all part of the journey. One mistake I made early on was believing that confidence would arrive before experience. I thought I needed to feel confident before I traveled, but confidence doesn't work that way. Confidence comes after experience, not before it. You gain confidence by doing, by traveling, by learning, by making mistakes and realizing the world doesn't end when things don't go perfectly. That's one of the biggest lessons caravanning has taught me. Now let's talk about free camping, because this was another area where I made a few mistakes. When I first started, I was so focused on finding the perfect free camp that I sometimes forgot to enjoy where I already was. I'd spend hours researching alternatives, comparing locations, reading reviews, looking for something better. Eventually, I realized something important. Most campsites are what you make them. A great attitude often matters more than a perfect location. Some of my favorite memories have come from places that weren't particularly famous or spectacular. What made them special were the experiences, the people, and the moments, not the campsite itself. Another mistake I made was not talking to enough other caravanners. When you're new, it's easy to think everyone else knows more than you, and that's probably true. But most caravanners are incredibly friendly and helpful. Some of the best advice I've ever received came from conversations in caravan parks, campgrounds, and rest areas. Experienced travelers often have practical tips you won't find in manuals or online videos, and most are more than happy to share what they've learned. Looking back, I should have asked more questions sooner, because caravanning is one of those hobbies where the community can teach you a lot. Now, here's another mistake that took me a while to recognize. I spent too much time worrying about things that never happened. I worried about breakdowns. I worried about getting stuck. I worried about equipment failures. I worried about making mistakes. I worried about situations that existed only in my imagination. The funny thing is that most of those worries never became reality. Meanwhile, all that worrying stole some enjoyment from the experience. What I've learned over time is that preparation is useful. Worrying isn't. Prepare properly, plan sensibly, then enjoy the trip. Because if you're always waiting for something to go wrong, you'll miss a lot of what makes caravanning special. Another setup mistake I made was chasing perfection. I wanted the perfect caravan, the perfect campsite, the perfect setup, the perfect travel plan. But perfection doesn't exist. Every caravan has compromises. Every campsite has pros and cons. Every travel plan changes occasionally. And that's okay. In fact, once I stopped chasing perfection, I started enjoying caravanning much more because instead of focusing on what wasn't perfect, I focused on what was actually good. And there was plenty to appreciate. Now, if I could go back and give myself advice before buying my first caravan, here's what I would say. Slow down. Don't rush upgrades. Don't buy every gadget. Learn your setup properly. Travel lighter. Use checklists. Focus on experiences rather than equipment. Stop comparing yourself to other caravanners. And most importantly, get out there and start traveling because no amount of research can replace real-world experience. The best lessons happen on the road, not in the driveway, not on Facebook, not in YouTube comment sections, on the road. That's where confidence grows, that's where skills develop, and that's where the best memories are made. Now, if you're watching this and you're brand new to caravanning, I want you to remember something. You do not need to know everything before you start. You do not need the perfect setup. You do not need every accessory. You do not need years of experience. You simply need a willingness to learn. Because caravanning is one of those lifestyles where you get better over time. Trip after trip, camp after camp, year after year. Every journey teaches you something new. Even now, experienced caravanners are still learning. I'm still learning. That's one of the things I love most about this lifestyle. There's always something new to discover, a better way to do something, a useful tip from another traveler, a lesson from a recent trip. The learning never really stops, and that's a good thing. So yes, I made plenty of mistakes with my first caravan setup. Some were frustrating, some were expensive, some were funny, but every single one taught me something valuable. And honestly, I wouldn't change that because those mistakes helped me become a better caravanner. They made future trips easier, they built confidence, and they taught me what really matters. At the end of the day, caravanning isn't about having the most expensive setup. It isn't about having the newest caravan. It isn't about having every gadget on the market. It's about freedom, adventure, exploration, meeting great people, seeing incredible places, and creating memories that last a lifetime. So if you're new to caravanning, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Learn from them, laugh about them, and keep moving forward. Because every experienced caravanner you see today started exactly where you are now. And chances are they made many of the same mistakes too. Safe travels, enjoy the journey, and I'll see you on the road.